Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are out there in social media land. My name is Gary Eelman,
And I'm John Berardino.
and this is The Middle for Men, where we take on various subjects of life and we look at them through a man's perspective. Also, about 31% of our audience are women, and so that's nice too. We invite them to join in, but fundamentally, we look at things through a man's perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about compassionate leadership. That's the name of the topic, and we have a lot to say about it again. I've been a lifetime with being a leader and following leaders. John sees leaders in his clinical practice. And so it's an interesting subject and it has a tremendous impact on most people's lives. I don't think a lot of people realize the impact they have as a leader. And so we hope to cover some ground today that I think should be in-depth and interesting. If you like our content, please do subscribe to our channel. It helps us a lot. Give us a thumbs up and revisit us and check back and see what's going on because we'll have more podcasts coming up. So with that, I'm going to start with John. And John, what do you want to say to start off with?
Well, it's an interesting topic that you and I have talked about, I think, at length in regards to what is compassionate leadership? What does it mean? To what service does it provide? Not only within the corporate field, but also I think within our community. And I know that you've discussed it at length with me, especially in regards to concepts that revolve around dignity and respect. As a leader, that this is an essential part of what it means to be perhaps effective. And those are the type, the term effective. I don't know how often you heard that within the corporate world that you operated in, Gary. Was that did you hear effective leader? Was that
Over and over and over. Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
So then what made up an effective leader as the individual was evaluated?
Well, it's again, it's not black and white.
Right.
There's a whole soup, I'll say, of things and different
Okay.
ingredients that make up a good leader, and we're going to get into some of those specifics as we move forward.
Okay. Yeah, because I tend to think of things, kind of from the bottom up, as a psychologist, that's
Sure.
the way in which we work. So I think of, well, what are the values that perhaps influence or factor into an effective leader
Yeah.
or maybe a compassionate leader? And how would you see it, Gary?
Well, to start off with, I started off in the very lower ranks, and of course, we're not talking here today. I want to qualify some things. We're not really talking about a sole proprietorship type of business where you go out
Yeah.
and you paint houses on your own, or maybe you have one person with you as a partner or something like that. What we're really talking about is organizations and
Yeah.
organizations that are structured largely in a pyramid structure where they have, as you rise up, you have more people working for
Yeah.
you, and so on. There gets to be a point where you have too many people working directly, reporting directly to you. Uh, some people say that that's 9 or 10 people, somewhere around there. After that, you become pretty effective because you can't spend time with those working for you. But in the beginning, in my heavy industry that I was in, I started out at very low levels working for literally the first line supervisor. And, we had good supervisors and we had bad supervisors. And it's just like you have good painters and bad painters. I mean, where do they get the skill sets? A lot of them learned them on the job, and a lot of them were inappropriately placed in a leadership position. And when I say they were inappropriately placed in my industry, if you were a really good technician, if you were really talented, skillful, let's say electrically, mechanically, whatever, they tended to promote you because they saw that as the next level for you. I mean, you're going to go up in level, but so many times, what really happened was they took somebody who was a technically knowledgeable person and they
Right.
promoted them into a leadership position, something they had no skills for whatsoever.
Right.
And the interesting thing was it's a double loss. You lose a qualified technician and gain an unqualified leader.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, it's often talked about how engineers and technical people tend to be more introverted, and people who are in sales and marketing tend to be more extroverted.
Yeah.
There's certainly some truth to that. Some people want to be individual contributors and they don't want to be leading people. They feel uncomfortable in that position. They avoid conflict in that position, or even discussions about things that they have to have discussions with. And so, I think some of that is genetic. I'm not sure. I just knew that as I rose up through the ranks, it was like weeding a garden. I would find supervisors where I found they were inspiring, or
Right.
they were able to give direction clearly,
Yeah.
different positive aspects of their
Yeah.
leadership capabilities.
Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
same time, I would find leaders that would just yell at you and
Yeah.
be very boisterous, and because mostly they were uncomfortable in their position, or they had an ego. And this is ubiquitous throughout industry, I find, is that people who rise to power, and you and I, John, have talked about how empathetic people tend not to seek power. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
narcissists do. So
Yeah.
you end up with a lot of people wanting to be the boss just to say that they're the boss.
It's true. Yeah.
No, it is. And
Yeah.
some people will have coffee mugs that says I'm the boss and stuff like that. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's stupid and ignorant. And I've always told people who work for me, the first time anybody would ever call me boss, I would say, please don't ever call me that again.
Yeah.
I hate that word. We work on a team. I'm a leader. I'm trying to help you
Yeah.
succeed. That's
Yeah.
my job. The last thing in the world I want to be is what typically you would refer to as a boss.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, and the few areas of my life where I have been a part of the corporate experience, I have noticed that, there's some people that are just really good at getting, others to do what they need, they need you to
Sure.
do. That's what their focus is.
Yeah,
And then there's some others that are able to do it maybe in more inspirational ways, like you kind of referenced, and
sure.
and noticing, kind of what's bad for the hive is also bad for the bee. Marcus Aurelius said that. So, and it's true. If you have one person who creates a culture that's negative or toxic because he's driven by his own entitlement or self-serving interests, then you're going to sense, well, how does that affect other people around them? And that's what I was really curious when you're talking about compassionate leadership. Does the leader's regard for others beneath him, around him, do you think that empathy is an important part of the ways in which he relates to those individuals?
I honestly think that's everything
Okay.
about being a good leader. I mean,
Okay.
I think it's so important for a leader to recognize that who they're dealing with are human beings. And this is the part that they don't get. So you're working for somebody, let's say you're in an organization of 10 people,
Yeah.
and we'll call your leader, manager. So your manager is the leader for the 10 people in the organization. And each of those people in that organization are very different from one another. They
Right.
all have different skill sets. They all have different insecurities. They all have different responses to certain ways that a manager will speak to them. But what the manager needs to keep in mind, and this is why I call it compassionate leadership, is that no one else in that person's life, except for their spouse maybe, will have such a profound impact on that person's
Yeah.
happiness and ability to enjoy their lives in a quality way. And
Yeah.
and you really, really do want your employees to be happy and to be living a quality life and to
Yeah.
getting the vacation and the R&R
Yeah.
that they need.
Yeah.
But they don't realize, a lot of leaders, and I think this is a huge fault in our system, where we don't train leaders. We just throw them up in these jobs,
Yeah.
and they don't recognize that a person, a man or a woman who's being led by somebody who doesn't have that compassion, doesn't have that sense of what role they play in that person's life, doesn't realize that that person goes home at night and sometimes is a wreck and can't sleep, or
Yeah.
drinks, or gets in arguments with their
Yeah.
spouse.
Yeah.
And this is all because they've got such a tremendous weight on their shoulders called their leader. And
Yeah.
and, and it's just a really, really critical role. And you can lose productivity and effectivity. And so, in fact, earlier we had talked about effective leaders.
Mhm.
I guarantee you, a leader who is not compassionate, does not have that empathy for their employees, and doesn't recognize their
Right,
role to inspire and
right.
to help that person succeed is not going to be an effective leader. And if you're not an
So,
effective leader, you fail, the organization fails, the whole team fails.
so a metric of maybe a good leader would be the quality of life that the individuals lead within the company.
Yes,
Could that be said?
exactly.
Like just like so, just in terms of their overall well-being,
Yeah.
the ways in which they relate to their coworkers, managers, the other leaders within, is that are relationships important to preserve, to establish?
It's yeah, it's everything every relationship needs maintenance, right?
Okay.
And so one of
Dignity
the
and respect, like
yeah,
you,
well, so yeah, foundationally, and I should have said this from the beginning, anybody who ever worked for me knew that my values were that no matter who they came in contact with, no matter who worked for them, whether they were managing up, which people need
right.
to do, or
Yeah.
managing down, or managing across with their peers, everyone that they meet deserves fundamentally, foundationally, to be treated with dignity and respect.
Right.
And if you
Right.
can't do that, you're not going to succeed. And
Right.
you're objectively wrong to begin with, in my
Okay.
opinion. So,
So would that be the definition of a bad leader, one who does not demonstrate that?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I don't see, well, I'll put it this way. I don't see how you could be a good leader or an effective leader if you want to use those metrics,
Okay.
by not having that foundationally that people that you work with at all levels need to be treated with dignity and respect. Now, if somebody does something to lose your respect that they deserve,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
different story. But what we do is we assume that everybody from the outset deserves that kind of treatment. And I
Okay.
think without that, I don't think you're
Okay.
going to be a successful leader.
And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but I'm wondering, how do you think compassionate leaders empower the people below them and around
It's
them?
so wonderful. It's the best thing about being a leader. Once I moved, they did make that mistake with me, but in retrospect, it wasn't fortunately for them or for me, is that I was really technically knowledgeable. But I was also very, I was very outgoing. I enjoyed interacting with other people. And so when I was promoted into management, it was really interesting for me. It was a new skill set to begin to practice. And that's really what you do when you first start out supervising people. If you think that there's just, a cookie cutter and this is your leadership skills, and it's not like that. You
Right.
have to learn how to deal with people. You have to learn how to deal with individuals as individuals. Everybody is not going to respond to you the same way. But the rewards from that, the return on that investment, there's just nothing better. I enjoyed that most. I've done, as part of my commercial responsibility, I've done some tremendous size deals. I mean, just, I don't want to talk about size or sound arrogant.
Specifics. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's just an arrogant thing to brag about. But what I
Yeah.
can tell you is that the best things that I enjoyed about my entire 53-year career in the industry was inspiring people to
Yeah.
succeed and then watching them
Yeah.
succeed. It was just the best, always
Yeah.
the best, always the
It, it
best.
it it is kind of interesting, Gary, because that's essentially what I do as well as a
Oh yeah,
psychologist.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding unique ways to empower people, maybe especially in arenas of life where they feel disempowered or disenfranchised or are depressed or kind of disjointed from certain areas of life that perhaps they want to feel more connected to. So,
sure.
and that's where I understand that there's obviously a prominent level of competition that occurs in the corporate world. But how do you think cooperation and compassion and collaboration come into perhaps somebody who does want to be promoted and to move upward in their career?
What I would do frequently is if there was somebody who wanted to move into a leadership position. Now, you can be promoted within a company and not lead any people. You can be
Yeah,
an individual contributor,
yeah,
and that's fine.
yeah,
But if somebody wanted to lead people who had never led people before,
yeah.
I would spend a lot of time with that person,
Good.
asking them questions, counseling them, and letting them know that this is something very different than they're used to.
Yeah.
and the types of things that they have to be able to do to be an effective leader. Do you
Right.
feel comfortable in a one-on-one
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah.
Let's play through some of that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And what I liked doing a lot was role playing. And in fact, in the course at Boise State, everybody in the I taught an honors class, and what we did was we did mostly role playing. I mean,
Yeah.
and it was the favorite part on the students' parts, and of course, it was the favorite aspect for me was to role play and to put people in situations that they're not used to, they're not comfortable with, and
Yeah.
let's try this out and see if this fits for you. It doesn't fit for everyone. Not everyone's going to be able to skillfully manage people, to inspire them, to help them succeed, and instead not get frustrated with them, not know how to speak to them, not know how to treat them, and not know how to have an impact on the quality of their life, both professionally
Right.
and personally. That's
So I,
not for everyone.
so I don't know if you know this though, Gary, but is that taught, I mean, conventionally at other schools? I mean, is this something that you think, or I don't know if you know of, or if you've made yourself more aware of the fact, are the tools that you were passing along, the ways in which you were promoting the ideals around compassionate leadership, do you think that's something that's accessible for other people
I
in
don't think,
school?
oh, well,
Or,
and did I cut you off?
no, no, no.
Oh, so I think one of the first things is that it's not taught
Okay.
in colleges. So,
Right.
for example, at Boise State, the course that I taught was nothing they had ever learned with, no matter what discipline they were studying.
Okay.
So, business majors had never been taught a thing about how to develop
Right.
interpersonal skills
That just seems
with
so
people that
crazy.
work for them. What's
I mean,
that?
it kind of blows my mind, Gary,
Yeah,
that this is not brought up. This is not discussed. This is not even explored
yeah.
at all.
Yeah, and management, there are management schools. I'll give you an example. The Center for Creative Leadership, which has two locations. Um, One of them, I believe, is in North Carolina, which I attended many, many years ago.
Mhm.
These are true leadership skills schools.
Oh,
What they
okay.
can't do is they can't take a person who's not cut out for leadership and has too many personality blocks or differences or different types of skill sets and make them into a leader. But what they can do
Right.
is they can set forth not only the fundamentals of leadership, but
Right.
also get you the kind of skills and the views and perspectives of things that you need to be able to have to talk to people and to inspire people to succeed. And so they put you off. One of the best things they do at CCL is they'll put you off like I was in a group of people, and leaders will rise out of those. It's amazing to see is that people want to be led. If you unfortunately ended up, dropped in a jungle with 20 people on an airplane and you're all okay, or somebody's injured, but whatever, but you got to get out of there because there's danger lurking and it's coming at you. It's amazing, but they've done these experiments is that a person will rise. A
Will
leader
emerge.
will
Yeah.
rise, and
Yeah.
people will follow because people need leadership, and you have to recognize, like, for example, if you're giving a presentation to an audience, this is one of the things I always used. In fact, I taught that as part of class, is when a person gets up to, they're really leading their audience, and what they need to recognize is that, and they don't, is they walk up there with fear and anxiety because they think they're in an adversarial situation.
Yeah.
Completely the opposite is
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
The audience wants you to succeed. They want to be led through this. They
Yeah.
want to see things come out right.
Right.
And it's the
Right.
same thing. It's the same thing in leadership, really.
Right.
Most employees that work for you, most people on your team want to see you succeed as a leader. And so if you treat them right, they're going to go, I've worked for leaders, I could tell you, and I have tons of anecdotes, obviously, for that long of a period of time. I don't want to bore everybody with it.
Mm.
But there are leaders that people would say to me, how do you like working for so and so? And I'd look at him and say, I'd walk through fire for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because I knew that he was that kind of leader to me. He
Yeah.
he was the same to me. If
Yeah.
somebody had said to him, how do you feel about Gary? he would have given him a similar answer. That, well,
Right.
there's almost nothing I wouldn't do for him, and I hope
Yeah.
he never leaves. And when you have those kind of dynamics going
Yeah.
in a leadership and follower position, and that's another thing is leaders need to know how to follow. You can't be a good leader
That's a
without
good point.
knowing how to
Yeah.
follow,
Good point.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I reported to a CEO or somebody in the C-suite, I knew that when they set forth the goals, these are the 5 things we're going to work on, folks. Okay, those are the 5 things I'm going to work on. I'm not going to sit there and argue with them. Now, if I think there's something irrational and I know they're open-minded enough to listen to it, then fine. And by the way, you should always be that as a leader. But at the end of the day, when the decision is made, here's the direction we're going. You get in line and you put one foot in front of the other and you follow. That's what you do. And everybody behind you that you're leading is following you. And that's what you do as a leader. But the compassionate part of it, I think, is the part that's missing. The skill sets of what I'll call the mechanical part of leadership is, the structure, the pyramid structure, whether it's a matrix organization or a pyramid organization. There are very different types of organizations, and I've worked in both types successfully. Here's the thing. Any organization structure can work if everybody has the same let's succeed together
Right.
attitude. That's
Yeah.
really what it is.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. It's unfortunate because I just think from a layman's perspective, what I tend to notice is that there's a lot of imposters that rise to the top.
Sure.
I mean, individuals that don't really genuinely have leadership qualities, but maybe can fake it enough, or pronounced, or maybe loud with the ways in which they communicate how they lead, and maybe that can be done in terms of motivating people through fear or threats.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
I don't know. Did you see that a lot? Did you see certain
Oh,
leaders that you
oh
came into
my
contact with
God.
use fear?
Oh, in the beginning, it
Oh,
was really horrible. In the beginning of
okay.
my industry, so we would do things like I'm going to tell a little story now. So we had a general manager. I think we had maybe 4,000 people on our division.
Hmm.
And every Saturday morning, we would have to go into what he called the budget meeting. And in that budget meeting were all the department heads, and there was about probably 15, 18 people in the meeting. And he used to sit at a head table in the center. Um, his name was Don, and Don would sit in the middle. And he had his 2 bulldogs on each side of him, assistant general managers. And this was a big region, really large geographically and with respect to people. And Don would start going through a book, and all of a sudden he would stop, and everybody in the room sat there scared to death. Everybody was shaking. This is a Saturday morning. It's your
Yeah.
weekend.
Oh, it's a weekend. Okay.
Yeah, it's a weekend.
Yeah.
And no people don't do that anymore. It's very rare that you find that, but at that time it was common. And Don would pick on somebody, and he, like, let's say it's my turn in the barrel. He's found something in my responsibility. I had probably close to about 1,000 people in my within my responsibility.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden he would go, he had this deep booming voice, and he was a big guy, so he had a big presence, and
Yeah.
he would scream my name, and he would literally yell, and he didn't care what kind of language he used or anything else, and he would be like, why the fuck is this? And he'd be pounding the desk and everything. And the best you could say to him, because you didn't have answers
Yeah.
off the top of your tongue, and I would say, I don't know, Mr. Swanson, I'll find out.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite stories about that was there was a guy who was actually one of my peers and responsible for what I was being yelled at for, but I refused to throw him under the bus. So I just sat there taking the beating, and he's yelling at me. And when he's done yelling, he says, I didn't answer. And when he was done yelling, he said, well, and the room is booming from his voice. And then he slams on the table in front of him, and he goes, well, and he sits up. And I said, well, I don't know, Mr. Swanson. I'll find out.
Right.
He sat back and he got real calm and he said, you know, I'm going to get a bucket and I'm going to set it up here at this head table. And every time one of you son of a bitches say you don't know, you're going to have to put a quarter in the bucket and I'll take that instead of my salary. And
This sounds
I
like a
mean,
terrible parent.
oh, I mean, it's funny now. But I'll tell you what, so I got along. I mean, he liked me.
Yeah.
I was one of his favorites,
Yeah.
because I
Well,
got shit done.
yeah.
But I'll tell you, at the end, I swore it off. I said after working for him, I will never let anybody raise his voice again. And
Yeah.
probably a year later, I was offered a position. We had changed the company around. He was gone. The new guy came in and he said, I want you to be my VP of this. And
Right.
I said, I can't do that, Frank. I like you. You're a great guy, but you followed in the footsteps of Don, and you're going to raise your voice and you're going to scream and curse at me. And I'm going to tell you right now, the first time you do that, I'm going to punch you in the nose. And he looked at me and said, how about if I promise I will never raise my voice
Then
or
you get to
curse
punch
at you?
him. Then you can punch him.
No, he said, would you come to work for me if I make that promise, if I make
Yeah.
that commitment? And said, so I thought about it for a second and I said, you'll live with that? And he
Yeah.
said, yeah. And he did. So
Okay.
the hysterical part of that was that we would sit in his meetings then, and there'd be 12 people in there, and he'd go around the table and beat the living shit out of everybody, yelling at them, abusing them, making them feel like crap. And when he'd get to me, he'd have to hold it all in. And he would literally be
I
shaking in
mean,
red. And
that's just
he would say, hey, Gare, what do you think we're going to do about blah, 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 you know? And I got the nickname from the other 10 or 12 people of Saint Gare. They
you
didn't know
did.
how
You
that
did.
I pulled that off. But, management has come a long way. Generally, I would say, in that you don't get yellers and screamers anymore.
Yeah.
Once I took the next position, I told my staff I had a direct report staff of about 10 people.
Yeah.
And what I told them right from the beginning is I never will tolerate any of you ever yelling, cursing, or belittling anyone ever, whether it's alone or in front of people. If I hear that from you, you're fired. It's just as simple as that with me.
Right. So that's kind of like the empathy or the compassion we were talking
It
about.
is. It
And
absolutely is.
yeah, and I think the big question is how do we lead with love in positions of power?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like you were able to extract that from your experiences, obviously some of them negative. And do you think that was, I know you talked about Leo Biscaglia,
Yes.
how he was influential for you. Do you think love then became a predominant feature of the ways in which you led then?
I think long before I read Leo's book, or books, I should say,
Yeah.
I had this sense at work that how badly I could ruin other people's lives
Okay.
so easily
Right.
because mine was.
Right.
And I would carry that stuff. And but again, I have an independent streak that I stood up finally and said no. I do want to tell one other quick anecdote about, because this tells you how effective you can be with people without ever making them feel bad about themselves. I walked into a group of offices once and I heard one of my managers in there. He didn't report directly to me, but he was
Right.
second down. And I heard him there on a speakerphone. And by the way, at that time, if he had a speakerphone, it was some
Big
sort
deal.
of a weird thing of power. I
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
why, but people used to speak to speaker and people on a speakerphone. I never did. But I hear him in there and he's screaming at this person, he's cursing at him and everything. And I just couldn't get to his door soon enough. I got to his door and I opened it. I walked in, I closed the door, and I reached over and I shut off the speaker. At that time, they had those little rocker switches, and I
Yeah.
shut off the speaker. And he just stopped and looked at me, and I sat down. And I said, George, his name was George. And I said, George, um, you know my policy on yelling at people and
Yeah.
cursing at people and making
Yeah.
them feel bad, don't you?
Yeah.
And he said, yes. And I said, George, if I ever hear that again, you know my rules. If I ever hear that again, you're going to be fired.
Yeah.
And I walked
Yeah.
out. So
Good.
about
Good.
a few weeks later, I walk in the same corridor. I hear him in there screaming. I walk in, I shut the door, I turn off the microphone, and I look at George and I said, George, I'm really sorry about this. I warned you. Um, but this was my rule. I don't approve of it. I won't stand for it. And
Yeah.
so I'm sorry to say you're fired. And he looked at me and his eyes filled up with tears. And I said, I know it's tough, but I have to enforce the rules. And he
Good.
says, this is everything to me. I have 20 years of service. And I said, yeah, it's rough, but that's the way it's going to go. And then I just sat there quietly and he sat there quietly. And I said, George, let me ask you a question. Just now, when I walked in the office, did I scream at you?
Yeah.
And he said, no.
Yeah.
And I said, did I curse at you or make you feel somehow meaningless or,
Right.
small?
Yeah.
And he said, no.
Yeah.
And I said, and yet me speaking to you calmly and having empathy even
Yeah.
for your situation
Yeah.
was very effective, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
said, extremely. And I said, okay, do you get the point now?
Yeah.
You're hired back. Don't ever let this happen again. Next time it'll stick. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, there it is, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's making all these people go home carrying this load and this
Yeah.
horrible feeling. And he was a very
Yeah.
knowledgeable person, and I didn't want to fire him.
Yeah.
But it's how I made my point. My point was made with kindness, empathy, dignity,
Respect.
and yet, this is what you would call an effective encounter, right?
Yeah. I mean, you practice emotional regulation.
Yeah,
You were able to hold space
yeah,
for that uncomfortable moment.
yeah,
There was a deliberate attempt to at least maybe create like an instructional moment for him so
yeah,
that he could see this without being belittled. And kind of going back to the themes that we've been talking about with respect and dignity and of course love.
yeah,
There was regard for the human being sitting in front of you who was going through a deeply emotional moment.
yeah,
And you were able to regulate, your emotions and affect as well, which again is not just the sign of an effective leader, but I think an effective human being and an effective human experience. It's
well,
what we would call a boundary. You set a boundary.
yeah. And I think as an effective leader, you don't get, I wasn't mad when I walked in. I was disturbed. I was
Disturbed and
bothered.
disappointed. Yeah, I'm sure.
But I contain that
Yeah,
because getting angry is not going to change it. So the best thing
yeah,
I can do is try and appeal to his good senses and to understand where I'm coming from and that there are consequences um, for not.
yeah,
And I think what a lot of people miss is they miss this kind of one-on-one time with a supervisor where they can get into things and a leader needs to be able to listen. God, if you need to be able to do anything, stop talking for a freaking minute and
yeah,
listen and let this person tell you what they're feeling, how they're feeling about their job. Do they feel fulfilled? If there's something else in their life they'd like to do. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in and just, I'd said I'm an open ear. Just keep talking. Just tell me what I'll listen to anything you want to talk about. Go ahead.
yeah,
And then it starts to come out and I pull it out of them and pretty
yeah,
soon I find out they're really not in the position they want to be in. They want to be someplace else, but they're good. They're
yeah,
good. They're knowledgeable. They have the right attitude and they say I'm just not feeling the self-gratification from this. My job as a leader at that
yeah,
point is to find them the position where
yeah,
they can succeed.
yeah,
That helps us all succeed
yeah.
because a rising tide floats all boats. It's as simple as that.
Good. And that's kind of going back to this notion of respect and dignity that you continue to keep demonstrating. There's patience there, and also, you weren't impulsive with how you communicate. I mean, I would call it, some people, bad leaders probably use sloppy communication. It's impulsive, it's fueled by their own kind of insecurities within the moment or capacities to regulate their emotions and then deliver a message that's effective. They just see it through dominance or the lens of power, or not feeling that they have to be in control of the ways in which they reference what they're thinking or feeling. So there's critical thinking in there as well. You know, how
It's
can I
exactly
problem
right.
solve?
Is
Yeah,
you need to put on your critical thinking cap
yeah,
and think about, pull in all the data points
yeah,
and see what's going on, and then try and figure it out. Sometimes it's a personal problem at home, and again,
yeah,
as
yeah,
their leader, you need to be able to listen to that. You need to be
yeah,
able to dig into that a little bit and see if you can help them in any way. I
yeah,
remember not that long ago, before I retired, I had a guy come in who had another person his age had died from a heart attack, and he was only in his 40s. And I got that this person was grieving about that,
yeah,
and but I could also see there was something deeper going on.
yeah,
And so I literally took him over my house, and we sat down and we had a glass of wine. And I said, I want to talk to you very personally about this. Um, Look, I understand you're grieving about this, but there's something else going on, and I'm going to tell you what I think it is, and then you talk, okay?
mhm,
I think you're personalizing this because you're 40 something and you think this could happen to you.
mhm,
And he was like, exactly.
yeah,
I can't get this off of my mind.
yeah,
And what I said to him was, here's what I really want you to focus on, okay? Is that what happens to other people, no matter what age they are, no matter what they die from or injured from or anything, has absolutely nothing to do with you. It
mhm,
just has nothing to do with it.
yeah,
It's terrible that he died. It's terrible that he was a year younger or older than you.
yeah,
It's terrible when anybody dies, but it has absolutely nothing to do with you. You need to move on and
yeah,
get busy living. And it helped him a lot. And, he was
yeah,
appreciative of it. Um, and these are the type of things a good leader does. I had a leader who had a big ego. A lot of leaders have big egos, just big
yeah,
egos. They can't be wrong. They don't like to be wrong.
yeah,
And this particular guy would twist things around to be right. And he was funny
yeah,
about it. He was hysterical about it. He would say, you would say, well, I don't think we can make, I'm just making things up. I
yeah,
don't think we can make tires that way because it's the wrong chemical. And
right,
you would know that because you know that for a fact.
yeah,
But he suggested using a different chemical,
yeah.
but he really doesn't know what he's talking
They
about.
don't know, right? He didn't know.
But he was a CEO.
Yeah,
He was not supposed to know what he was talking about.
right.
But he would change it and say, well, what I'm saying though is, and he would change it around. If we use the chemical you're saying, we don't use the chemical we're saying, then maybe we can make more margins, right? And then he would
Yeah,
force you to agree with him. You ended up where you wanted to be, right? With it going in the right direction. But ultimately it became his idea. It had to be his idea, which was annoying, but also amusing. And I say the reason that it was amusing was because he was also a very compassionate leader who did listen, who would, even when he did those things, he would come back to, he called me his big brain. He was a CEO, and he'd
right.
always call me up and tell me to put on my big brain and start thinking about things. And he was just a hoot to work for. And I saw him one time, and he was with a counterpart of his. He was with a peer, another CEO. It was a strange situation, and I don't want to get into the details. It would take too long. But there's an audience of about 400 or 500 people, and the first CEO gets up there, and he's got a slideshow, and he's standing behind a podium, and he starts talking about numbers, and he starts talking about how we need to get to where and blah 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 and everything. And he speaks for about a half an hour, and he says, and now I'd like to turn it over to Billy. His name was Billy. And Billy goes up, grabs the microphone from the podium, walks away from it, shuts off the slideshow. Somebody shuts that off. And he walks out into the audience, and he said, I just want to tell everybody here how, like, I'm just totally psyched for this. Like, we're going to do so well. And I'm going to be here to support you. I am a serving leader. And if you can't get something done, you come to me. And I got to tell you, he just blew it out of the park. Like everybody came out of there going, "Oh my God, this is going to be our CEO of the future."
Right.
And so that kind of inspiration, that kind of support for people is really what a leader needs to do. And I don't think
Did
there's enough of that going on. I
did
think,
you come did you come I'm sorry to cut you off here. Did you come across leaders who were open to receive information, or feedback, or maybe even criticism?
oh yeah, in fact, the very last CEO I worked for was one of the nicest people in the world. He's one of the people I would have walked through fire for. Um, he was a little too nice in that, and everybody said that about him because he didn't hold people accountable as
Okay.
leaders need to do.
Right.
But the wonderful thing about him is he was always open to listen,
Right.
always open to, he'd put on his critical thinking cap. And if you had a good point to make, he'd be the first one to agree with it. He never let his ego get in the way of doing the
Mhm.
job. He wanted people to
Yeah.
succeed. He had I would say tremendous empathy for people, just probably a little too far to that side of the spectrum. He needed
Okay.
to be a little bit tougher and a little stronger with his people.
Okay. And maybe that's just, we talked about boundaries, communicate being an effective communicator in terms of
Yeah,
delivering a message, providing feedback,
yeah,
sharing that space, holding space, for curiosity,
yeah,
contemplation of an issue or,
yeah.
a situation. So, how would you sum this all up, Gary? I mean, what would you say you want our audience to kind of come away with here in regards to?
I think there's a couple of really important things that if I could say to,
Mhm.
as many people as I could,
Right.
not everybody's cut out to be a leader.
Okay.
I think that's really important to recognize that,
Okay.
yeah, there might be some money associated with that. There might be some gratification associated with that. You also might suffer with that. Um, People take things home. Not only the people that you're managing, but if you're not managing well and you're not comfortable in that position, you're going to take that home. It's going to keep you awake at night and you're going to worry about everybody on your team. So you have to be able to lead, be compassionate about it, and walk away from it and leave it behind. You can't take that home.
Okay.
Um, there to be a leader, not everybody, you're not going to be able to inspire everybody. People have problems. They suffer with them. Sometimes they're just asses and they don't want to cooperate. They're contraries. No matter what you say, they'll find a way to argue with you around it. And you're going to have
Right.
to let those people go. And you have to have the strength and the courage to do that
To
as
do
much
that.
as you
Yeah.
have to have the strength and the courage to be empathetic about it when you do. And I think, getting mad at somebody and firing somebody, that's not appropriate at all. But when somebody can't do the job and you have to let them go, then you have to let them go. And you can do that and treat them with dignity and respect to the extent that they'll accept it and move on. So not everybody's meant to be a leader, but if you are going to be a leader, you need to be a follower and try and take your points from the people that you find inspiring and move you forward in your career. And then
Yeah.
B, make sure you flow that down. Like if you've got a great leader and they're inspiring you, let it flow down and let your people know that work for you that you're there to support them. You're a serving leader, and that you're interested and and um, and not only interested, but you're there to help them to
Yeah.
succeed. That's again, a rising
Yeah.
tide lifts all boats. So I think
Good.
that's what I would want people to know. And I know I've done a lot of talking, but it's 53 years of that stuff built up. So
Well, yeah, I mean, your exposure to it, obviously, I mean, the majority of your life has been dedicated to, this arena. But I think it's helpful, I think, to the audience, Gary, to know that someone with your experience and your acumen, has seen everything and knows, so much about the climate in which these scenarios exist with leadership.
and,
But
and you know
I think
what? Not to interrupt you,
okay.
John, but
Yeah,
you know what? There's so much more to learn for me. I mean,
absolutely.
honest to God, if I lived another 50 years, and I were to remain working, I think I'd learn every day for 50 years. I just think I just think the fundamentals of treating everybody with dignity and respect, of treating your employees with empathy and compassion, and trying to help them succeed
Yeah.
in their careers and make sure they have a happy personal and professional life.
Yeah.
And never get into gossip, never talk about other employees to other employees and their weaknesses, and never do that. Spend time one-on-one with people, do things that are constructive, do things that are positive. And here's one thing I'll say. Always imagine that if you want to be successful in a company, not only as a leader, but as an employee, always think of money you spend in a company as though it's your own. And
Right.
that will always make you make the right decision. So, generally speaking, what another thing I like to tell people is you'll never get rich working for somebody else. Now, there are exceptions to that. And an exception to that is if you're looking to get rich, try and acquire equity in the company you're in. Holding stock in a company makes you an owner, makes you think differently, and everybody who is an owner then should be pretty much rowing in the same direction.
Right.
So,
Right.
another little tidbit, but
Okay.
I'll
Well,
leave it there.
and it sounds like, one of the things as we're talking about some of the variables that you see within the corporate field, power, ambition, competition, kind of striving to rise to the top. I think what I understood from this, Gary, is that a good leader, a good compassionate leader, is someone who uses their power to empower others.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and I think
Exactly.
so that, and I think that's inspiring in itself, and a good theme for us to maybe end with.
Maybe we could have summed up the whole thing with that, John. That was really good.
Yeah.
Someone who uses their power to empower others. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I
I
like
think
that a
so.
lot.
Yeah.
So with that, everybody, we're done. Sorry this went on so long, but hopefully you found it interesting. Again, if you liked our podcast, please do subscribe. I'm Gary Yeoman from the Middle,
And I'm John Berardino.
and we'll see you on the next podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching.